let's take a look at Falling Sky, Volume 6 in the Coin series. I had kind of a weird relationship with coin games, which is to say, I really like them as games. However, and I believe that they do an adequate job of simulating at kind of a high level the operations that are going on and that are represented. Hence, they are actually war games because they tend to be mostly a political military combination of activities. However, I've always had a little bit of grumpiness about them. Not at first. At first, I was going like, "Oh wow, this is great," and I'm beginning to better understand where my concerns come from. I bought a couple more of them recently, and I played this one once already. I played one of the short scenario, or the short scenario. There's a couple of shorter ones, and then I'm going to do the heaviest of them now. This is the setup. It's much, much sparser. It's before the revolt really gets underway. I think my concern has to do with sort of modern game design ideas. But I've always expressed it as is, look, it always comes down to a really close game right at the end. Almost invariably, the way I play, everybody is defensive enough that they don't let someone else get away with a victory. Now, you could take chances and let someone have a shot at victory, and every so often they will be able to get a victory earlier in the game. But in general, it comes down to that last card, and it is often balanced enough and close enough game that the order of players on the last card determines who wins the game. Now, the reasoning behind this is, one thing is there's not a lot of snowballing. There's no runaway leader type situation. The other players, if you're in a 4-player game, the other 3 players can bring you down if you're starting to get ahead. If it's clear you're going to win, it's almost impossible to get yourself in a position where people don't have some opportunity to take you down. So that's one of the facets in it. Another is that the game won't take you past the point, and the way it's designed, it won't work if it does, because there is that possibility to take people down. But it won't take you past the point. It doesn't take you to a point where victory is obvious. It's like always puts you in a position where you're close to winning. You may be able to get yourself very close to winning the game, but even if you were to surpass that winning the game situation and be doing a little better, you wouldn't be in a position where you could just dominate over all the other players by the mechanisms in the game. And I'm trying to think. I don't know if there's anything to say about that in particular, about the newer style games, but it tries to cut short the amount of time that the game takes, sets the victory conditions at a finite and very reachable level, but gives players a chance to prevent each other from winning. And all of that takes it to a point where, yeah, quite often that last card is going to be the important thing. It creates very exciting games. Games that are close, games where maybe you don't feel like you're absolutely in it necessarily the whole game. Like, you may not feel like you have a chance to win at certain points in the game, especially if you're getting close to the end and you're falling behind. But who wins is going to be in doubt throughout the whole game. There's no point where you feel like everybody should just say, yeah, we're going to concede to so-and-so. That kind of thinking's never in play in it, which may be appealing to the more modern gamer. To me, it works a couple of times, and other games that are like this, Geronimo, an old Avalon Hill game, has something kind of similar in it, although it's a lot more random in terms of how the points end up coming out. When I saw the coin games, they very much excited me. Here I Stand is kind of similar, and I love that game, where there's this serious balance of power between the players, and you all have this, everybody together can kind of work to prevent somebody from getting the win, but eventually somebody is going to win. And there's no, I don't know. Anyway, however that may be or whatever, it kind of taints the experience for me. And when you combine that with some of the abstractions in play, which make them kind of run together and feel a little bit all the same. Now, I'm sure standard hex and counter war games feel a little bit all the same too, And one of the things to look at with these is that the actual play of the game, there's sort of this core mechanism, which is kind of like the idea of movement and a combat results table and stuff like that in your standard hex and counter type games. But there's still a lot of room for some variance in here. And that's expressed generally through the actions that the different players have, which are always different. Like, these are meant to simulate an asymmetrical warfare, and through obviously the cards, which have events on them, etc., which can change things significantly. In fact, this particular game has at least a card or two that does change the game significantly. One of them, the Optimates card, gives you a possibility for sort of a sudden death type victory. Basically, it's a situation where Caesar's doing well enough that he has to run back to Rome and start this, and get involved in the civil war, or he's going to lose big time, and that means that the situation in Gaul could be affected by that. Anyway, we'll see if that card comes out. Very good chance. Not all the cards are even in the deck, however. There's a couple that aren't. A bunch of pieces that aren't in play either. They give you a bunch of extra pieces, which, for me, I got a whole nother set for the damn game because I think it's for this one, because I picked them up at Consim Expo. GMT gives out freebies of excess pieces and stuff. And okay, well, we're not going to go into too much detail on the coin system itself. I'm assuming that you're familiar with the coin system if you're looking into this one. If you're not familiar with the coin system, take a look at probably my Andean Abyss. The first one I did was, is the best in terms of, I'm assuming, in terms of an introduction to the system. Other people may give the full rules for the system in this. I'm going to worry more about the specifics of how this is different from other games in the series. And it's not that different. It's one of the things. They do kind of run together in a lot of ways. Mainly you're trying to jockey for a position on this track, and when you get close to victory, then people have to worry about stopping you. The victory conditions are usually not balanced in the sense of everybody having to achieve the same kind of thing. And this one, very clearly, they are very different victory conditions in play here. One thing that excited me about this one, Volko returned to it with his son this time. Apparently his son was very interested in doing something on the Gallic Revolt, and so they worked together on this one, and I think they've come up with some interesting little changes here. It's a non-modern situation. There have been a couple of others, the American Revolution one and Pendragon, which is not quite what I expected, but I also picked that one up. And that changes some of the effects. It's also not necessarily, it's not as much about a hearts and minds type thing, although there is a representation that works sort of like that, which is going to be the tribes. Let's take a look at some of the components, and then we'll dig into the specifics of the rules. First of all, you got these pawns. They're going to be used, as always, for marking down the actions that you're taking, primary and secondary actions. Well, let's look at the board. Each space has a space for control, and you don't really need these no control markers. I put them out, and I'll probably end up not using them for the most part. You have some tribe locations, which this is the hearts and minds part, is which tribes you control in an area, instead of like counting up a population value or whatever. And then an amount of space to keep your forces in them. These are war bands, or auxiliaries. In the case of the Romans, they act pretty much the same. These are to mark ownership or alliance with the tribes. Control markers, of course. Forts, and the equivalent to them are citadels, which we don't have any on the board yet. One thing you'll notice is that there's 5 players, or 5 factions. It's still only a 4-player game. There's just a non-player faction in the Germans, which the players have some ability to interact with. And of course, like all the coin games, it allows you to drop players and play things, using a bot, which of course I do not look into at all. One nice thing about this one, they point out that, hey, you can play this like in less than 4 players without bots by giving people multiple powers, and they give rules for how to adjudicate victory based on that. And they seem to work well enough. Okay. Let's see, anything else we got here? Yeah, the Romans have legions, which are these squares, which will just be heavier powered military units. And then we have these big things here, which is something kind of new, personal leaders. Each faction, except for these blue guys, the Aedui, yeah, the Germans don't have one either. So each player faction, other than the Aedui, has a special leader. And that's going to affect where they can do some of their operations. Up here, you have various victory point tracking items. And this is kind of weird. Each player has their own victory conditions, as I said. And they have their own way of counting them, and you'll notice there's no blue counter up there. The blue counter is actually over here, and these don't express the entirety of the victory point situation. They actually do in terms of the Romans and the Belgae, but the other powers all have more complicated victory conditions. You have a set of cards. We'll look at those at some point or another, but they're your standard coin-style cards. There are the scoring round cards, which are, in this case, winter cards, interspersed in the deck in such a way that you have some ability to predict where they're going to show up, but you're not absolutely certain when they're going to show up, which is particularly is particularly good about winter. I'm always a little iffy about the scoring rounds elsewhere, but here it really does make sense to me. Okay, counters. You have some informational counters here, which have to do with specifics. These go on the cards to indicate whether or not, when you have a capability on the cards, which is something that lasts, more than just that event. You can mark which side of the capability is in play. Some devastated markers, scouted markers. You're going to have hidden and unhidden units, and scouting makes them a little bit more hidden, a little bit less hidden. Some special cases here, including dispersed tribes, which is an aid to the Romans. All right, let's look at the capabilities of the different players. And that'll get us some of the idea here. So the commands are the main capabilities you have, and then they have the special abilities that come off of that, which you can do in some cases, usually when you're first player, but sometimes when you're the second player off a card. Recruit, I didn't explain these discs. These are how many resources you have. money. Okay. So recruit allows you to add auxilia in the case of the Romans. It'll cost you 2 resources per region that you want to put a little marker in to do this. And then each of the regions, if you have Roman control or Caesar's there, Kaiser, whatever, you get a Roman ally there, i.e. you get to place a disc in an empty circle. If there's a Roman leader of any kind, or an ally or a fort, you can put auxilia in place equal to the leader plus the fort plus the allies plus 1 if it happens to be provincia. Okay, and you can do that in as many areas as you pay for, as long as it's a regular command. If it's a limited command, you can only do it in one area, which is the normal rule for all of these. March, you can move and hide Roman forces. You pick regions with legions, auxilia, and Roman leaders. And that's going to cost you 2 per region, but it costs more if things are devastated. Oh, recruiting has a special role, and this has some effect on everything. Recruiting doesn't cost you anything if it's along your supply line. Your supply line is going to consist of areas that are under Roman control, areas that are connected to, going back to Cisalpina, areas that are connected to that are under no control as well. And finally, if any of the player factions wish to, they can add their own areas to your supply line. In general, that'll be the Aedui who want to do that. They're the most aligned with the Romans. The others are unlikely to do it, but there might be times due to the victory conditions and somebody getting close to winning or whatever, where you're willing to help the Romans conduct, say, an operation against the Belgae by giving them some additional capability. Okay, so March costs you 2 resources per origin region, and that's doubled if the regions are devastated. Now, you can't recruit in devastated regions. And what happens there is in the regions that you select to move, all the auxilia in that region are hidden, and then you're able to move up to 2 adjacent regions. Now, if you move through a region with enemy hidden warbands, I think it is, they're allowed to cause some casualties to you. Caesar has the special ability to move up to 3 areas, but no matter what, you have to stop if you enter a devastated area, if you cross the Rhenus, and if you go overseas into Britannia or out of it. The Gauls and the Germans will be able to cause losses. It's every 3 hidden warbands that causes the loss of one unit. Now, there's a special thing with losses. Warbands and auxilia, when they take losses, they just take them. But legions are special, and forts also fit into that, where if they take losses, you get to roll a die to see if they actually take the losses. And you can take multiple losses on them as long as they stay alive and absorb those losses. Okay. If you're going in or out of Britannia, you're not allowed to take a special ability. Ooh, I think I screwed that up when I played. See if I remember it this time. Another one is to seize. This is going to give you a right to gain resources, and it also allows you to crush tribes. Okay, so the first thing you do is you disperse subdued tribes at Roman control as desired up to 4 of the markers. Now you have 4 in the game, which means if some of them are already on the board, you can't place those again. Now, once you do that, the Averni and Belgae have a chance to get a rally operation, i.e. grow troops, in any adjacent spaces. So the tribe that you're dispersing, its manpower has a possibility of being angry with you and joining the factions. Let's see, what else do we have here? if the region wasn't devastated, you get points for each subdued tribe, which are the ones that don't have anybody in them, and Roman allies, which have a Roman disc in them, a couple of those there, as well as a big +6 for each of the dispersed tribes that you just placed. Now, the Gauls and Germans can cause some losses in those regions as well. Okay. And each of these also has a special ability, or that can be done with it if you're allowed to do the special ability. Final option is battle. You're allowed to kill things. This costs you 2 for each region, or 4 if the region's devastated. Then in each region, you pick somebody who you're going to beat up on. If they're Gallic, they can retreat, assuming they have a place to retreat to. And then they're going to take losses based on, there's a flow chart that handles the whole battle situation, but basically this section handles the losses. We can spell this out. If they don't retreat, so the losses are going to be a half per enemy warband or auxilia, plus 1 per legion and leader. But if Caesar is involved, is attacking, he causes 2 losses per legion. And there's modifiers to this, so like if you're retreating, you take half losses. If you have a fort and you're defending, you take half losses. All kinds of stuff like that. If you're retreating, you're not going to be able to do casualties to the enemy. A lot of times these battles tend to be complete wipeouts though, because the attacker causes their losses first, and if they manage to defeat the enemy completely, there's nothing left to take a swing back at them. And then there are the special abilities, which can be included, one item from menu A, one item from menu B, or column B in the menu. When you're taking your first action, or in one case, if somebody takes an event, you're allowed to do the same thing as the second player. And that includes build, which costs you 2 resources per fort or ally that you're going to place or remove. And at Roman ally or supply line with Romans, and within 1 of Caesar or with his successor. If Caesar dies, if any leader dies, they have this side, and in that case, they're not quite as powerful. In the case of the build action, you can only build in the same space instead of adjacent. And what happens is in each of those regions, you get to place a fort, or if there's Roman control and you didn't do a seize operation, you can place a Roman or remove a non-Roman ally, but not a citadel. Okay. And supply line, same rules go into play. Whether or not somebody's going to grant you supply line access is a decision made at the moment in each case. However, if a supply line is not granted, you're allowed to choose a different action. So if you don't like the choices that people made for supply lines, you don't have to take the action choices that you made. Okay. Scout. This gives you an opportunity to move your auxilia 1 space. And if they're within 1 region of Caesar or with his successor, you can flip the hidden auxilia up, and each one will flip up 2 enemy warbands in the same region, but it also adds one of these scouted markers, which makes them a little harder to hide again. And the final one is besiege. This works regardless of where the leaders are. Battles with legions involved, in which they're attacking enemy tribes or enemy allied tribes or citadels, i.e. there's something in one of these boxes for the group that you're attacking. You're allowed to remove the one defending citadel or allied tribe. This is really good for removing the citadel. However, the citadel still counts to have losses for that battle. But removing citadels is hard to do, so it's a particularly valuable thing to do there. Start looking at the others. I got to take a little break though. Next one's the Aedui, and these are all of the other three players are Gallic factions. And they have very similar abilities, but then again, they're kind of similar with the Roman as well. Rally, you augment allied forces. This is regions without devastation. It costs you 1 resource per. And if you have control of the area, you're allowed to place an ally into that area, into a subdued tribe in that area. Otherwise, if you have allies or a citadel in that area, you get warbands equal to the number of allies and citadels. Or, if you have an allied city, which is one of these spaces that can hold a citadel, you're allowed to upgrade it to a citadel, assuming you have additional citadels. In some cases, the players don't have very many of these citadels. So they got to be kind of careful where they choose to place them, I guess. And the final option is, if it's in your home region, you can place a warband. Now, in the case of the Aedui, this is their home region. In the case of the Arverni, this is their home region. In the case of the Belgae, it's the entire Belgae yellow zone. Okay. March. They're allowed to move and hide their forces. Each region with their own warbands they can move. It costs 1 resource per region to have devastated. And they're allowed to move to an adjacent region, and they flip over to hidden. Note, the Romans are faster. They can move 2 spaces or 3. All the Gauls can only move 1. Okay. Raid. You pick regions with hidden forces. It doesn't cost you anything. You reveal 1 to 2 hidden warbands per region. And for each that you flip over, you're going to add 1 resource. Or you get to steal, none if it's a devastated region. Or you get to steal a resource from a faction that doesn't have a citadel or a fort in that region. So you can take resources from people if they're in that region as well, which is kind of cool. And then the final is battle, which works very similarly to the Roman battle. I guess the biggest difference there is that you have the possibility of ambush, and your forces don't work as well because you don't have legions. So legions are worth 1 point each, and these warbands and auxilia are worth a ½ point each in general. Okay. Let's look at the specials. One of the specials that all the Gauls and the Germans have is ambush. If you're doing a battle in a region and you take this special, as long as you have more hidden forces than the enemy has, you're allowed to do this. It means the enemy cannot retreat. Caesar has a special possibility of doing so, except never mind. And each loss removes 1 defender, and there'll be no counterattack. Okay. There are other options. Let's work our way up. Suborn. This is a really cool one, and this is where the differentiation really is on the Gauls. Suborn allows you to pick a single region with a hidden warband, and you can spend, well, you spend different amounts. But basically, you're allowed to place and or remove 3 pieces in total. No more than 1 of the pieces can be a tribe marker, and the others are warbands or auxilia, and it costs you 2 resources to either remove or add a tribe to the space, and 1 for each warband that you move. And remember, you can only do 3 pieces total. Remove or place. Okay. And their final one, and this one's weird, is trade. All regions within a supply line, and again, they have to define this, are legal. Now, the Romans can't deny the supply line. They can't deny it completely, but they can aid this. So factions agree whether or not they're in the supply line. If it's in the supply line, you get 1 or 2 if the Romans agree for each of their allies and citadels. And each subdued tribe in an area under their control. And if the Romans also if the Romans agreed, each of the Roman allies under their control, in a region under their control, will give monies as well. Okay. We haven't explained victory yet, which is important. So let's take a look at these. Now you'll notice the same base effects here. So we'll look at the Arverni here. Their special abilities, their first one is Entreat. And they can do this anywhere? No. Sorry. With any command. They can only do it in regions with their hidden forces within one of Vercingetorix or his successor, or with his successor. It costs you 1 resource each, and you get to replace 1 warband or auxilia in the space with one of your own. Or, if you have control of the area, you can choose to do this with a Gallic or German ally, but not Roman allies and not citadels. Devastate. You can do this to any of your Arverni-controlled regions within one region of Vercingetorix or his successor. Yeah, I'm never going to pronounce that right. And let's see, the Arverni remove 1 in 4 each other faction, 1 in 3 of their warbands, auxiliary, or legions in the area, and a devastated marker is put in that region. The devastated marker is going to increase the costs of doing things. It screws with supply lines and does all kind of bad stuff. But it's in your own regions, so it's kind of painful there. It's definitely scorched earth. Ambush works the same as before. Okay. For the Belgae, they also have the ambush. They have an enlist ability where regions within one of Germania or with Germanic pieces and within one of Ambiorix or with his successor. You're allowed to bribe them, and they will count as Belgic pieces for the command, or you can do a special German command with them. And the Germans have their own set of commands over here, which they do on their own during the winter time, but you can pick one of those and do that as well. And theirs are similar, but not exactly the same as the Gallic abilities. And of course, ambush is still there. I said that already, but rampage. If you have hidden Belgic warbands within one region of Ambrioix or his successor, or with his successor, you can pick a faction other than the Germans, without a leader, citadel, or fort, and either remove or retreat one of their warbands, auxiliary or legions, for each hidden Belgic warband that flips to reveal. These are retreated to an adjacent region that has to be under control of a faction that will allow them to retreat. This is how retreats work, including in battle. If you don't have somewhere to retreat to, you can't. In this case, it would destroy them, I believe. But I'd have to look that up. But yeah, you have to have somebody who allows you to retreat into that. And in that case, that might cause some issues. Okay. We did not talk about the victory conditions yet. Let's hit those. They're on each of the cards as well. So let's look at the easiest, I guess. The Germans don't get to win. The Romans. The Romans' victory condition is to have subdued or allied tribes, and that includes dispersed, up to above 15. And this happens during the victory phase in the winter. That's when you check to see if anybody won. If they manage that, they win. And the same victory conditions kind of apply at the end of the game. It's just you don't have to meet the automatic victory status. So whoever comes closest kind of wins. Okay, well, we'll look at the next one, the Belgae. They're also somewhat similar. They have to collect up points, getting them up to 16 as well. They get to count allied tribes as well as areas under their control. They get the population value of that area under their control. So, for example, this area is worth 3 if you control it. This area is worth 2. Their current value says it's 9. That's because they control 2 areas, adding up, 3 areas, adding up to 5 plus 4 of these is 9. Okay. How do you count the Romans? Yeah, that's kind of tricky. The way you count them is you count the number of discs that aren't on the board and subtract it from 30. You can not count the Romans because otherwise you'd have to hunt them down and count them. So that's kind of painful. Okay, for these guys, the Arverni, theirs is kind of tricky. They have to have, I believe it's 6. No. They have to have more than 6 of their discs on the board. That's pretty easy. And they have to have a whole bunch of Roman legions off the board. What is that number? Hold on. No, I'm sorry. Off-map Roman legions is 6. Yeah, so that's the number that's counted here. So they have to have more than 6 off-map Roman legions, and they have to have more than 8 of these discs and citadels on the board. The final one's the Aedui. They have to have more allied tribes than anyone else does, any other single faction. Okay, and right now the largest single faction is the Belgae at 4. It can be quite possible, and the shortest scenario starts this way, that this is at 8 or more, and they can't possibly have more than that because they don't have that many discs and such. Oh, there was something else I was going to say, and now I've lost it. So we should probably swap batteries. Let's take a look at what happens in winter. First of all, when a winter card comes up, frost goes on the card that preceded it, and that means that nobody can march during that turn, which can significantly inhibit your capabilities. One of the powerful cards out there is one that allows you to do winter campaigns, because it'll allow you to screw with things after the victory check, unfortunately, but on the last turn of the game, it may allow you to swing the victory into your hands by having that card. So that can be a really potent card. Okay. So the first thing that happens then after that, when winter happens, when we actually get to it, is you check to see if the game has ended due to an automatic victory. Somebody reached their victory conditions. If multiple people do, whoever reached them the most wins. Then the Germans are going to take their activity. We'll get to that in a moment. After that, each player has the option to fall back into quarters. The Germans have sort of mechanical rules to get them into them. For the Gauls, as long as they're not in devastated areas, they're okay, but they may want to fall back into their own tribes and consolidate their forces, and they're allowed to do that. Well, they're allowed to fall back into areas they control. And then the Romans, who have kind of a complicated set of rules, but basically the way I read it is they can fall back into an area they control, and then they can follow their supply line as far as they like. I think. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's the way I read it. Next thing is harvest. Everybody's going to get a pile of money. You basically get money the Gauls get money based on the number of tribes they have allied with them. The Romans get money from the subdued tribes and the allied tribes. And the Aedui get a little bit of extra cash. The Senate, if the Romans are doing well, the Senate will love Caesar more. If they're not doing well, they stop loving him as much. That will affect additional troops that are available in terms of if you get additional troops based on what row you're on. It'll also affect some auxilia that you get. And then finally, spring, some mechanical tasks. For example, these will get removed. Everything becomes hidden again. Leaders come back if they died as their weaker replacements. Now, for the Germans, they do a series of things. First, they rally, they build up forces. Then they're allowed to march. If they have control of areas, they will leave their forces at minimum for control and then go out adventuring. Then they're allowed to raid, and they don't get money from raiding, but they take it away from other player factions. And then finally, if they're able to ambush, they will conduct an ambush in any areas that they're capable of doing that. In order to ambush, you have to have more hidden warbands than the other person has hidden stuff. So often that's kind of hard to do. And then some special rules on them. They will always try to cause losses when they can. They'll always harass. They'll never agree to create supply lines, all kind of stuff like that. Under any conditions, unless you have some kind of special card which changes that. Anything else? That feels like all of it. Yes. Page through. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. During the final winter of the game, you end up calculating victory where? I think it's done at the victory phase, which means you don't go through the whole winter phase. And basically what happens is you're calculated as how far behind your victory conditions are you. So for example, the Romans will subtract 15 off wherever their track marker is, and that'll be their final victory conditions at that point. The Averni, they will have to they'll take their tribes and subtract 6 from, they'll take the legions and subtract 6 from that, and the tribes and subtract 8 from that, and they'll take whichever one of those total values is less, i.e. which one they miss by the most. Okay. What else? Shit, I know there was something I wanted to talk about there. Yeah, okay. There's a whole big playbook which has absolutely nothing in it to do with rolls. Seriously, it's a 50-page playbook. Some explanation of the cards. There may be a little bit more information on these than the cards themselves give. I know with a couple of them I've had to look things up, and I don't know if I got a better answer out of it. The design notes, which of course are very interesting. A big set of examples in it, and strategy guide, etc. Hey, if they can... I honestly don't know how necessary it is. The scenarios fit in here. We've got a rule book that comes in at 36 pages, and most of it isn't there. We get some... I think there's already something significant here. No, I guess not. Yeah, this is not including anything additional, just the scenarios. And then very useful is the index there. These pictures are helpful actually in setting up the scenario. You may not understand how things are set up the first time you try to play it. I know that I had, so like I said, there's extra pieces. That became a bit of a question in terms of, well, are citadels, do you have both a circle and a square for them? No. You can either, if there are citadels here, you cannot put circles in their place. You can't replace them with circles. So it's not a matter of like, it's both a controlled tribe and a citadel. You have your number of tribes, so like 10 tribes and one citadel, not 10 tribes and another tribe or a citadel, which wasn't clear to me. And let me see what else. I don't know what else to say there. That's really about it. Anyway, we'll get this one on the road fairly shortly, I hope. It took me a while to play it. So I did something kind of weird with this. I played it on my floor in my bedroom, where I have heat. But also, it's easy, it's just easier to access than coming up here and trying to play a game, if I'm messing around on the computer or something, it's sitting there right in front of me. I can look over and say, geez, I really ought to get some more of that done. So in that sense, it does help a bit to have it there. On the other hand, I didn't find myself, after a little while, I found myself less and less into playing. I didn't do the straight playthrough that I would have done, maybe, 20 years ago or whatever, right? Something's just changed in me fundamentally where I don't play as hard as I used to. I don't feel as compelled. Like something like this, I would have played through start to finish, and I would have said, "Oh, look, 8 hours or 12 hours went by." That doesn't happen anymore. It just doesn't. I don't know. I'm just like not as addicted into playing out a board game, even with the 18xx's, which were really key. But these two, these also hit me in that same sort of way. Funny thing about these is, even though they are, decent simulations and everything like that, I play them kind of more like I play a game of Britannia or Geronimo. I feel like I'm playing something very light, and I don't feel the same way that I do about playing, most war games. I don't know if that's a positive or a negative. I really don't. But anyway, I've brought this up before with these guys, is that they just don't feel quite the same. It's not like there's a lot of strategy in them. There's a lot of thinking. There's a lot of figuring out, maybe more, but they feel kind of Euro-ish in a sense. And I don't know what to say. I feel like I'm playing something that's got a gamey mechanism with this in it. And I don't object to that. It's just somehow the core mechanism being the same bothers me more than it does in like playing a bunch of tactical games from the same system or something. I'm not sure why. I feel this kind of, geez, do I really need another one? I don't know. Did I really need another Napoleonic Brigade series game? Probably not. But the situations are different enough. The strategies are different enough. But it all comes down to manipulating this track, and trying to keep that balance so that nobody's ready to win. I don't know. I definitely don't know why Here I Stand doesn't fall into the same category for me. All right, let's send it up.